This week's Breaking the Huddle brought to you by SCAD, Scott Countyans Against Drugs.
Welcome everybody to the News Graphics Weekly Sports Show, Breaking the Huddle. This is episode 2. We're calling it Down to Business because if you were part of last week's, I know you want to call it a circus, a carnival, or whatever it was surrounding the first ever football game between the two schools, it kind of overshadowed everything, not in a bad way, but it just kind of felt like that game was almost its own entity. And now the teams can focus on week 2 and the rest of their season. I know Coach Paul Raines for Great Crossing and a couple of the Scott County players, notably Kate McKee, said, yeah, it's kind of good to get this one out of the way, and now we can focus on an opponent that's not quite as emotionally charged. So let's look ahead. Well, actually, let's look back to week 1. We don't want to belabor the point too much. It was a one-sided game. Of course, Scott County, you probably know by now, a 72-7 winner over Great Crossing. Some of the highlights for Scott County: Philip Garner coming back from a broken ankle early last season, missed most of the year. He carried the ball 7 times, scored on 4 of them, almost 5. He got dragged down at the 1-yard line on another carry, but 220 yards, definitely the offensive player of the game for the Cardinals. Bronson Brown scored the first time he touched the ball from 60-plus yards out, ended up with over 150 all-purpose, made a big catch over the middle in addition to his runs. Kate McKee with a touchdown run, Jeremy Hamilton with a couple of scores. I thought the defense was outstanding. I mean, we had a lot of eyes on that defense with a lot of new starters, mostly new starters, really. But just swarmed to the ball, gang tackle now. Obviously, the level of experience in their opponent and their competition is going to step up in the coming weeks. But first test was passed, certainly for the Cardinals. Defensively, Great Crossing got a chance to flaunt a trick play in the passing game a little bit and got on the board, got a chance to sing the fight song, everybody happy in the blue and the green, as the polecat formation responsible for the 74-yard touchdown pass from Caleb Perry to Bryce Hearn. Got Great Crossing on the board early in the second quarter. It was 33-0 at that point. Nothing to lose, really, if you're Great Crossing, throwing caution to the wind there a little bit. But obviously a good learning experience for Great Crossing, not the result they wanted, but clearly this week already it has paid dividends. The freshman team for the Warhawks picked up a victory, 28-0 over GRC on Monday night. So it seems like those young guys getting experience every day of the week and learning on the fly. Good for them. Let's talk about this week's matchups. Great Crossing will be at home at the Bird's Nest Stadium. They'll take on North Bullitt. You may remember Scott County took on North Bullitt the last 2 years, won both those home games rather easily. So maybe, certainly not the same level of opposition for Great Crossing that they saw last week with one of the top teams in the state. But the Eagles came off a 40-14 win in their own right over North Oldham. So a team that's much better, much improved this year coming in. And again, as always, I think every opponent will probably take the field with more experience at the varsity level than Great Crossing this year. But with every week, they get a little more of it, do the Warhawks, and they can kind of step up their game. And just every week is a new measuring stick, I think, for them. So we'll see how they handle an opponent that's a little less emotional, and certainly not the crosstown rival coming in this week in North Bullitt. Scott County goes to Lafayette. That was a rivalry everybody wanted to talk about 3 or 4 years ago, of course, with Walker Wood and Jed Wills and that Lafayette cast that kind of handled Scott County a couple of times in the playoff in a couple of close games, one in particular in 2016. I know that SC felt should have gone its way. Last year, closer than expected. Lafayette came out early in the second half, took a brief lead, and then Scott County kind of blew the doors off at that point. 59-28 victory, but it was a lot closer than that final result indicates. A couple of those Lafayette standout players that gave Scott County trouble last year are back. Drake Nelson, the quarterback, J.C. Shagog, the receiver. So those are a couple of people you got to keep your eyes on. And it's a road test. It's a true road game, not like last week at the Bird's Nest where Scott County was simply wearing the white on the road sideline. They'll have to deal with all the distractions of an away game. We'll see how they handle that. They should be a favorite. I want to talk a little bit about some of the other sports. Big volleyball matchup right before the Battle of the Birds, their own Battle of the Birds, christened the GC Gymnasium as Great Crossing hosted Scott County at 5:30 on Friday afternoon. Scott County wasn't expected to really put up the kind of fight that they did. They won the first set. They were ahead in both the second and third set briefly before Great Crossing took both those games and went on to a 3-1 victory to stay undefeated at 3-0. But a good representation, I think, for Scott County. A lot of younger, at least in terms of varsity experience, younger players for SC. And they gained a lot from that game. So it'll be interesting to see how it benefits them going forward. Great Crossing boys soccer remains undefeated. They've had a couple of home games weather delayed or canceled or postponed, so it's been kind of tough to get their season rolling, but they'll have a big game at Madison Central on Thursday night. And that kind of covers, I want to give a shout out to Cross Country. They had their first meet also of the season. A bunch of top 10 finishes, Ava Plum of Great Crossing and Aaron Luckett, on the girls' side for Scott County. And in the boys' race, Tyler Walker coming back from an injury. He finished second, and a third-place finish for James Wireman as well for SC. That meet was at Bourbon County on both sides. Let's hear from the players and the coaches from the first ever football Battle of the Birds. Let's wrap up this week's edition of Breaking the Huddle with what they had to say about that unforgettable night.
I think looking around and seeing this crazy environment with the flashing lights, look at this, everybody going crazy. It was an unbelievable atmosphere, an unbelievable experience getting to this game. No matter what the score, even though it was a blowout, I'll never forget this.
I don't ever wish a game away, and I try to enjoy every one of them. When I first started coaching, we would lose, we would win, but we would miss a pass and an extra point or whatever, and I'd spend the whole night just ripping somebody, ripping myself, ripping the kids, and I don't do that anymore. When we went to the finals in 2004, we got beat 49-9. I had a meeting before we left the field with our staff, and they all had to turn an index card in to me when we got back about things we had to do better. In 2011, we got running clock by Trinity. After the game, I took a picture with my three sons. So my perspective's a little different at age 50 than it was at age 30. And so I didn't want to wish the game away. I wanted the kids to enjoy every bit of it.